Of course, as soon as we go live, the live banter stops. And
So, yeah, I think it does show how much the market has grown and how it will grow organically. The fact that it's happening here and you're seeing people kind of getting into doing it is like, that is not something that is regulated at all, but like people catch on quick apparently. Like, people are like, okay, this is what we're doing. So I think it's really cool. And that was one of the things that really interested me in cannabis in general, is that, like I said, I had been traveling other places where like rec was legal, adult use, and it was like so much other stuff outside of cannabis going on that kind of had to do with cannabis. Like there was like hot yoga with cannabis. There were like these underground things. There were like festivals that people go to.
there are
and things
comedy
like
shows now.
Comedy shows, yeah. So it was like so much, and I was like, can you imagine a world where people are just naturally integrating it into regular things?
Yes,
like,
I can. I
so
have been imagining it for the past 20 years.
Right. So it was like, that was one of the things that when it was like it came here, I was like, you know what? I want to be a part of this because it's going to turn into something. There's a whole community around this. So that was like really to see it kind of start happening now, even like within the past few years that it's been like once they opened the doors and technically we had legalization, like before there were even dispensaries and people were like getting cards and stuff, just to see how now like the events have changed. Like every year there's more stuff going on for 420. When you think about it, there are more sales this year because there's more dispensaries opening, but it kind of like, again, it starts to build the community, it starts to make these things natural, it starts to kind of make that whole organic feel that I think we're kind of moving towards and that places move towards once they have fully legalized or that their industry starts to grow depending on, because it's always that gap space kind of that we clearly see. It's getting less. I feel like a lot of places the gap is getting smaller between when you actually get a bill signed or like somebody votes on something and then the industry actually gets going. You know, you see that in different places.
Well, half the country now has got legalization, 18 states or something like that, so other states that are planning on doing this are learning from the mistakes of previous mistakes, and now the startup time is less, because they can say we're not doing that, and that.
And so I think that that's also really beautiful, the way that we're starting to see. Even like that means that the reality is that people who are making these laws and these bills are really paying attention to what's going on and like the benefit of having adult use and having a world where cannabis is just like,
it's coming and it's going to be normal. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to episode 2 of The Fields. My name is Jeff Rowse. Next to me is the Executive Director of Greater St. Louis NORML, Miss Abrahama Keys. Abrahama, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
We are going to get into a little bit of field state news before we get to our interview. Folks, I want to let you know a little bit about what we've done here at the dispensary. We have completely redesigned our display cases. I don't know if you all checked it out on Facebook and Instagram, but I mean, we've completely redesigned it. And by me, I mean our frequent field state collaborator, Kristen Williams, the owner and operator of Hempsley.com. That's HEMPSLEY.com. She redesigned our display cards and the way our products are displayed within the cases. So please come on down here to Field State in Florissant and check it out. Also, I have a little 420 news I can share with you. On 420, we are going to be having $20 eighths. Yes, that's right, you heard me, $20 eighths. If you have loyalty points in your wallet, stack them on top. Who knows, we may be paying you to walk out the door with a bag of cannabis. We're also going to be having donuts from Old Town Donuts. Every purchase here in the dispensary is going to get you a free raffle ticket. I'm not going to tell you what we're raffling off yet, not yet. Lots more to be announced, but I am going to tell you we'll be having patient sign-ups all day long. The first 10 patients who want to sign up don't yet have their card. You're going to have your card paid for. That's right. First 10 patients who want to get signed up for their medical card here at Field State, your card's going to be paid for. All right. Abrahama, hi. I just want to let you all know, we had her on the books for season 1 of The Fields, and there was scheduling conflict. She wasn't able to make it, so I've been looking forward for a long time for this interview, Abrahama. What initially stirred your interest in cannabis activism?
So I think it was just a history of kind of seeing what was going on in a lot of other places that already had adult use legalized. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, and just seeing the leaps and bounds that it's made as it started coming out. So I had been places like California and places where there was legalization, and it was like a whole community in Denver. That was like one of the places. It was so normal, like you would see ads in the regular newspaper like, oh, it's a cannabis fair next week, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You know how like,
so you're walking around in new places, cannabis is completely normal, nothing like this for you back home.
Exactly. So when I heard that it was coming, I was like, oh my gosh, like how can I be a part? What can I do to really, put myself in the community? And I think a lot of it too is just the reduction of stigma in those places, and really seeing how people were really open and talking about it, and really wanting to kind of help promote that conversation on every level, even like within my own community, thinking about other people who I knew who love cannabis as much as me, and wanting to be able to be like, okay, hey, this is what's happening, this is what the deal is for Missouri. So I wanted to be educated and really kind of just interject myself in any way that I could.
And I imagine going into a place in somewhere like Colorado or Oregon where it is adult use legal, walking in the pressure isn't there. You're not looking over your shoulder like, am I doing something illegal? How close have you seen the war on drugs? How up close?
Well, I think that, from my own personal standpoint, a lot of it was just surrounding like people who I knew who were cannabis consumers who had that fear, and like the way that it even affected their use and the things that they would use for. I remember I had met a lot of people from across the country, even like around the time of like protests. A lot of people were in the city, and I had met some girls just randomly on the town stuff, and they were talking about how they wanted to smoke because they knew it was a better alternative to like a lot of the drugs that they were taking, but they were really afraid. And I thought about like the idea of fear of prosecution, like for stuff that was medicine. For me, I'm being honest, I was still consuming back in the time when it really wasn't technically legal. And so I thought about how it could help so many other people if it wasn't that stigma, if they weren't scared of going to jail for something that could potentially make their life better. And then I think just from the standpoint as an African American female, everybody for the most part knows somebody who's been to jail for drugs. And so I think that alone says a lot. A large amount of people I know, and there may be some people who don't, but you still feel the impact. Like a third cousin, or that there's maybe this side of the family that was, so it may not be direct.
How does it impact the family?
And I think that for the family, I mean, I know people who, like, they were like, oh, I've been in jail, and then I come out and I have to try to provide for my kids, and the scars that it leaves on your record, I think that's really big. It affects everything from employment to, credit scores, things like that every day affect your quality of living. And so I think the idea of legalization and how it can improve the quality of living for people on so many different levels was just really important to me. And like really, again, reducing that stigma, making it not being tied to being illegal. Because like I said, when I first thought about that, there are people who are not living in the best way that they could because it's just not legal. And I'm like, how does that work? There are so many more medicines, things like that,
So seeing these instances, the drug war up close, going to different locations, seeing the freedom that legalized cannabis allows, is that what led you to want to join NORML and continue your activism?
Yeah, NORML was always, when I was in college, actually, I had went to I went to Mizzou and I went to like a little kind of on-campus fair where there are like all the different organizations.
I'm sorry, just really quick. NORML, by the way, folks, is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. They've been in existence since the 1970s. A group of lawyers got it together, actually funded by a grant from, I was just talking about it earlier, Playboy. Hugh Hefner.
I know.
Hugh Hefner.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, please, go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So NORML, I literally saw a table and a girl walked up to me and I said, "What's NORML?" And she said, "NORML is for people who would rather some days smoke a joint than get drunk." And I said, "Oh, well, that's me. Wait a minute." So that really drew me. And I also think an important part of NORML is that even though it's a national organization, there are chapters within your own communities. And so it's a very good way to make impact at your community level and to continue to kind of educate people in the community on what's going on kind of a larger scale. And so being able to know that as a resource was just great for me. And it was crazy because that was years ago that I saw that table, but when St. Louis, had a chapter that had already been going, and when I started looking for places that I could go out and just go to a meeting and figure some things out, there weren't a ton of options, honestly. There aren't a lot of places where, especially back 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, whenever I started this, there just weren't that many options. There were like Facebook groups and things like that, but NORML was having these monthly chapter meetings. And so that gave me an opportunity to kind of go out and sit down and hear people giving information about what was going on with the legislature, and kind of, they were doing things like working on, with people who were already locked up and talking about how like the new legislation could possibly get these people free who they had already been working with, and there were a bunch of different things going on. And I thought, oh, this is where I can really kind of sink my teeth in and really be a part of what's going to be happening and what's happening right now. So.
And in 2.5 years, you've risen to chapter president.
Yes. So,
how many chapters are there in St. Louis?
There's one chapter in St. Louis. There's also a chapter in Kansas City. We have a Springfield chapter, a Cape Girardeau chapter, and a Columbia chapter.
And do those 5 chapters have common goals?
Yes. So, everyone's real goal is, legalization. And so, as we know, that looks different, a lot of different places. So National NORML kind of provides an umbrella for us, and they keep us kind of in the loop of what's going on other places. They're really good if you want, to start, like when you start looking at legalization, they provide a lot of support. And then you have a state NORML. So we have like a Missouri NORML that's kind of the umbrella for the state level. And we convene like once a month on like the first Monday of every month and talk about what's going on with adult use, what's going on. We have like a big, coming up the weekend of May 22nd, we have a big chapter statewide conference. And that during that conference call, there are some national leaders on there. There are a lot of people who, from people who are in media to people who are just heads of organizations across the state. So it's usually a variety of different speakers, and right now it's fully virtual because of the pandemic. We'll probably move back to actually having it in a physical location, but yeah, those type of things kind of get everybody on the same mindset and really educating people, being able to provide opportunities for them to sign petitions and things like that are what NORML's goals are.
And they're for full-out legalization, rescheduling from Schedule 1 probably to the lowest, so it opens up research in the scientific community. We're not talking descheduling or decriminalization.
Yeah, so our push is really for what is going to give people the most access and with the least amount of possible consequences. So again, I think that definitely looks different when you go from state to state, because some states are still working on medical. They're just, getting into that. And so NORML comes in and they help with those campaigns that are going forward and helping educate people and lobbying and being a part of the conversation. And then you have states like here where right now we have initiative going that Missouri NORML supports, and so they are part of the conversation with that. So.
Okay. How does Greater St. Louis NORML combat cannabis propaganda? I know every single Halloween when it rolls around, you see stories in the news about edibles making their way into kids' candy bags.
I think that we really do, the ways that we do that are a few different ways. One, really just having an open spot for people to have that conversation and learn what the laws are about and what is and what isn't. So we had, like, just at my last meeting, it was a guy, we get a lot of people usually who move from out of state and they've just come to Missouri or they just moved to St. Louis and they're like, what are the actual laws? What can I do and what can't I do? You know, and so we're kind of an outlet in that way. So we continue that conversation and let people know, like, hey, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. People email us all the time and say, hey, you know, I'm having a question because I'm on probation or parole and I want to know, should I do this or that? So we try to either provide them with that information or, you know, point them in the right direction so that people have a real safe source of information. And especially that was like one of my goals, is to be able to educate people who look like me and be able to be like in a position to where anybody can come, whether you're black, white, brown, whether you're new. We have older people who are part of the conversation. We have younger people who are part of the conversation, but to really be that even base where somebody can say, hey, the same way that I did, I'm looking for somewhere where I can get that information and have that conversation in a real setting. Because I think people always think, where do I figure out about it? I don't know where I go to learn. You don't, when you're just having a session with your friend, you're not really talking about legalization or what the real laws are or things like that. And even we have them in sometimes really public locations. Like right now, we're holding our monthly meetings at Shapley's. So I meet the woman who owns Shapley's. I'm like, hi, I'm with National Organization for Reform Marijuana Legislature here. So, but she's like, hey, come and have your monthly meetings here. People come in, they eat, they see we're not like walking around high and bumping into stuff or like making a scene. But it's like now when people come in, they're like, oh, that's the NORML meeting back there, you know? So really making it, again, a regular part of the community and trying to reduce that stigma and make it to where people are really looking at things in a different way than what they may have preconceived in their mind that legalization or cannabis use looks like.
Does that mean representatives of the cannabis industry need to start acting or presenting themselves differently so the whole 60s hippie stoner stigma goes away?
Well, I think that when you really look at where cannabis is today and even how things have emerged in Missouri in the past few years, we see that most people have kind of stepped away from that. Like, there are always going to be your people who are like, even when I'm doing like sign-ups with Presto Doctor and things like that, there are some people who are like, I'm not here for the machine of cannabis and putting it into the mainstream. And that there are going to be that group of people. But then I meet people who are literally like, you know, I always wanted to use it because I have horrible migraines and I hear that it could help me, but it was illegal before and I wasn't going to do it then, and now I just want to have this information. I want to learn and I want to be a part of the community, and they see that there are these dispensaries that are not like, you know, smoking holes that people are like, even like your local bar. They're a lot less quiet and a lot more security in a lot of cases. So I think having that continue to happen and continuing for people to see that right now that's not really even where cannabis is really important.
So do dispensaries have to do something different?
I think that they really don't have to do much different. I think that Missouri has emerged well. I think that really what they have to do is really work on like connecting with the everyday consumer too, because it is hard for dispensaries because you do have a lot of regulations. There's regulations on everything from how packaging goes to how you can market. And so I think that dispensaries just have to be kind of conscious of how they make their way into the community and be really, you know, selective and kind of take those approaches that are impactful. What
do they need to do to build trust in these communities that they're opening up in?
I think it's really just about kind of showing and proving. For example, things like there are these different, like you guys have a block party that's kind of out there. Having those open events where people can kind of really access and see what's going on. A lot of times, entering a dispensary is really overwhelming to people. It's really, even if you have been smoking your whole life, you may have never been to a dispensary. So I feel like people, I hear all the time when I do like side events and things, and people are at these different fairs and kind of pop-ups and things in the community, like, well, I've never been to a dispensary, so I didn't want to go in. Who am I supposed to ask once I get in on the inside? They don't know even that bud tenders are friendly. They think about it. And then sometimes people hear medical cannabis and they think it's going to be like the doctor's office experience. They're going to for everybody. So.
Okay. Are there any industry leaders that you have come across in Missouri that we should be keeping our eyes on?
So I think that there are a lot of great people in the industry right now. They're doing things on a lot of different levels. Like Brennan England's a good friend of mine. He's doing a lot in the way of...
And Brennan is...
He is actually the owner of the St. Louis Cannabis Club, also known as the Cola Lounge, which is a private consumption lounge in South City. So, and he also is the head president of M for MM, Minorities for Medical Marijuana. So he does a lot in the community on both sides, kind of on that higher, more professional side when you think of being like an organization leader, but he also has a really good connection with the community. They hold great events there. So that's a person to watch. I think that just all of we have some great people in like Kansas City, like Jamie Katz, who works she's the president of NORML there. She has done leaps and bounds on making parental protections an important part of the language for legislation, because that's one of the big things that we see, which is crazy but true, people in divorces or who are like, hey, or people who want to claim that somebody's an unfit parent trying to use cannabis.
Cannabis is a weapon.
And so, weaponizing cannabis, and I think that she has been really pivotal in bringing forth a lot of those good kind of everyday instances that we see and making those known and trying to protect people on those levels. So she's great. But there's a lot of great people in the industry right now that...
What would you suggest to entrepreneurs who are interested in getting into the cannabis industry?
So I think that for people who are interested in getting into the cannabis industry, I think the main thing is just to get out there. Like, a lot of it is that the industry is new, and so everyone is learning, and so it's a good time right now to kind of find your place and figure out what it is that you're passionate about, because cannabis can be a part of almost anything. And so I think that if you have a love of the plant on the medical side, really doing that. If you have a love of the plant just for your own personal consumption, thinking about where that leads you once we do have adult use. So I think it's just about really immersing yourself in the community that we have now, bouncing ideas off of people, following, dispensaries and hearing podcasts like this, but really just getting out there and getting as much knowledge as you can.
How close is your connection to the plant?
So I really am a cannabis consumer. That's what really drove me. And I think that I didn't start, like some people are like, oh, I started at 15. I didn't start until I was in college. And really it came from like me having anxiety. I had horrible anxiety, and people were like, oh, you're the doctor at school was like, you can try pills. And I was like, and so I had a friend who was just like that she smoked, and I was like, because that really wasn't like how we were raised even. And I was like, and then I started smoking, and I was like, oh my gosh. I went through like 3 hours in which I was not worried about breathing and everything else in the world around me. And so it was such a relief. I was like, okay, I'm here for it forever. So that kind of was like for me. And then, like I said, just kind of continuing into it through my adulthood and really, not really being a drinker even, and really just knowing. That's why I always tell people when they're signing up for a card, people are like, oh, I don't have a reason. And I was like, yeah, you do have a reason. Like, think about, when do you consume the most? Like, is it after work? Then you need it, because some people go out and have a beer. Is it in the morning because you need something to kind of get you going? So there really is usually.
I always called it the great social equalizer, because it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. If you have a joint and somebody else, and you're willing to share with somebody else, you've made a friend for life.
Exactly. I think that is, and I think that was another thing, even when you go to other like places that were illegal, we were like in a park and the lady was like, hello, would you like to smoke as well? And I was like, oh, my goodness, wow, so I didn't know people are just so friendly here, you know? So it's like that connection, you know, kind of if someone usually is cool enough to be like smoking, that like there's something that you share, there's something that you can spark up a conversation with this person almost immediately, because you're like, we have something in common.
Sometimes you can just look at an individual and say, you know what, I think they're cool. It's kind of like you got
Exactly.
camera
Like,
radar. I was
something to discuss.
walking through downtown Providence, Rhode Island, and out of the shadows, this gentleman leaned forward and said, hey, you got a light? He was sitting on a stoop. Startled me for a second though, but I tossed him a lighter. Never forget that.
You said, hey. So yeah, that makes you automatically feel like you can talk to that person. I was like, that is pretty amazing. Like, that's an amazing ability for something that is why in my head I'm always like, why are we talking about this even being illegal? And it grows right out the ground. I mean,
and it helps regulate so many things in the human body. We've got what, 12 systems that are part of our homeostasis, and the endocannabinoid system regulates them all.
Exactly. And it's so crazy, because when I tell my kid this stuff, it's like, for a minute, it's almost like he doesn't believe me, but then he goes and he like Googles it, and then he comes back like an hour or two later, and he was like, so I guess you're right about the endocannabinoid stuff.
So kids, straight from a mother's mouth, listen to your parents, especially when it comes to cannabis. They know what they're talking about. How are we doing on time, guys? Okay. We got the signal. Abrahama, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It was a long time coming, and I fully enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next week, we are going to have the general manager of Field State Florissant, Mr. Nick Wegman, here on the show. He's actually going to get into the specifics of all the fun 420 stuff we have going on, and that's going to be on the 18th, so that's only going to be 2 days away from 420. So, folks, again, my name is Jeff Rowse. Thank you very much for tuning into the Fields. We'll see you next week. That was awesome.